So our goal for today is learning to multiply radical expressions. That's what we're going to be working on today. And in order to do that, we need to kind of review some ideas that we've been doing with radicals thus far. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at it. The biggest thing, obviously, is that we can simplify those radicals. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at simplifying 180. Well, I see that 180 has a 0. Behind it, which we know means we can divide it by 10. So we have 18 and 10 when we divide it by 10. Well, 18 we can split up into 9 and 2, and then 9 we can split up into 3 and 3. 10 we can break down to being 5 and 2. So here are the ends of all of our legs. So we're going to write that underneath the radical. So we're going to have 2 times 2 times 3 times 3 times 5. So I'm going to have one pair of 2's and one pair of 3's. So I'm going to bring out each pair to the outside. Remember, when you take a pair out, you just bring it out once. And then left underneath the radical is 5. Well, 2 times 3 is 6. So you end up getting 6 square root of 5 for number 1. Now, let's take a look at number 2. So for number 2, we need to simplify each of these radicals. So we need to simplify 162. We also need to simplify 242. Well, I don't necessarily know what goes into 162, so I just divided it by 2 because I saw it was even. And then I got 81. So then 81 I can break down to 9 and 9. And then each of those 9's I can break down to 3 and 3. So for 162, I'm going to have 2 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. So that means I have 2 pairs of 3's that I can write on the outside, and then left underneath the radical is 2. So that's going to become 9 square root of 2. Then taking a look at breaking down 242, I divided that by 2 and I got 121. Well, 121 I can break down into being 11 and 11. So then underneath my radical, I have 2 times 11 times 11. So I can take out a pair of 11's. So then I have an 11 on the outside and then 2 underneath. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it as one fraction over itself. So I'm going to have 9 square root of 2 because that's what we simplified 162 down into. And then 242 we're going to take and we're going to have 11 square root of 2. So I can take and I can cancel out the square roots of 2. And then I end up getting 9 11's. Now taking a look at number 3. So what we want to do for number 3 is we want to divide out that 108. So I divided it by 2 and I got 2 and 54. Well, 54 I can break down into 6 and 9. And 6 I can break down to 2 and 3. And 9 I can break down to 3 and 3. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write out my entire radical, including all of my x's. So I'm going to have 1, 2 2's, 1, 2, 3 3's, and then I'm going to have 7 x's. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I ended up having to continue kind of on the next line there. So I have 1 pair of 2's, 1 pair of 3's, and 1, 2, 3 pairs of x's with 1 x left over. So on the outside, I'm going to have 2 times 3, and then I'm going to have that multiplied by 3 x's. And then left underneath the radical, I have 3 and I have an x. Well, 2 times 3 is 6. X times x times x is x cubed. So I have 6x cubed times the square root of 3x. And that's your final answer for number 3. Taking a look at number 4, we learned with number 4 that as long as you have the same number underneath the radical, you can add them as if they were like terms. So we could take the square root of 2 and we can add it plus 4 square root of 2. So we can put a 1 out in front. So 1 square root of 2 plus 4 square root of 2 is going to give us 5 square root of 2. Then 3 square root of 3 minus 7 square root of 3. Well, 3 minus 7 is negative 4, and then we get the square root of 3. So I have 5 square root of 2 and then minus 4 square root of 3. So now on this one, all we can do is add these two because they have the same number underneath the radical. So we have 4 minus 3 is just 1 square root of 6. And then that 2 square root of 10 is going to stay the same. There's nothing we can really do with that guy. So then this is really the same as just the square root of 6 minus 2 square root of 10. So that's your final answer for number 5. So then for number 6, we're going to have to do some breaking down of these radicals. So 27 I can break down to 9 and 3, and then the 9 I can break down to 3 and 3. So on the outside I have 6 times the square root of 3 times 3 times 3. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to break down 12 into 4 and 3, and then 4 I can break down to 2 and 2. So then I'm going to have 8 times the square root of 2 times 2 times 3. Then for 75, I can break that down into 25 and 3, and 25 breaks down to 5 and 5. So then I'm going to have 2 times the square root of 5 times 5 times 3. So let's go ahead and taking a look at taking out some of those pairs. So we can take out a pair of 3s. So then I get 6, then I take out a pair of 3s, and then left underneath the radical I have 3. Next I have 8, and I'm going to take out a pair of 2s, so that's times 2. Left underneath is 3. Out of the next one I can take out a pair of 5s, so then I'm going to have 2 times 5, and left underneath the radical is 3. So let's go ahead and let's multiply those out. So 6 times 3 is 18 square root of 3. 8 times 2 is 16 square root of 3. And 2 times 5 is 10 square root of 3. So now we want to go through and we want to add 18 plus 16 plus 10. And that's going to give us, when we add all of those up, having a brain fart here. When you add all of those up, you end up getting 44 square root of 3 as your final answer for that problem. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and let's take a look now at multiplying radical expressions. So when you multiply radical expressions, here's what you're going to do. You're going to multiply the coefficients on the outside of the radical together, and then you're going to multiply the number or the radicands underneath the radical. So that number that's underneath the radical, you're going to multiply those together. Then you want to simplify everything so that you don't have any perfect squares left underneath the radical. So go ahead and get that written down, and I am going to move on to number 7. So taking a look at number 7, so we just want to multiply what's underneath the radical with what's underneath the radical. So we're just going to take 2 times 5, which is 10. So this is going to be the square root of 10. Now before we're done, we need to check that the square root of 10 can't be simplified anymore. Well, the square root of 10 just breaks into 5 and 2. Since I don't have any pairs, the square root of 10 is my final answer. So then, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to do 8. So I'm going to do 4 times 6. So when I do 4 times 6, that's going to be 24. So I multiply the things on the outside together, and then I'm going to multiply the things on the inside together, which is 3 times 2, which is 6. So then 24 times the square root of 6. I know in my head that 6 breaks down to 2 and 3, so I know that I can't simplify that down any further. Let's take a look at number 8. So for number 8, we're going to multiply the outside. So I'm going to do 2 times 1 times 4. Because remember, there's a mysterious 1 on the outside there. So 2 times 1 times 4 is going to give us 8. And then underneath the radical, I'm going to have 3 times 2 times 3. And that's going to give us 18. Now in this case, that 18 can be broken down further. We can break down the 18 to be 9 and 2. And we can break down the 9 to be 3 and 3. So then I'm going to have 8 square root of 2 times 3 times 3. So I can take out a pair of 3s. So I get 8 times 3, and then left underneath the radical is 2. So then I get 24 square root of 2 as your final answer for number 9. Now, taking a look at number 10, again, I'm going to multiply those numbers on the outside. So I'm going to take negative 6 times 4. Negative 6 times 4 is negative 24. And then left underneath the radical, I'm going to have 5 times 15. Well, that's going to give me 75. So I need to break down that 75. And I know I can break it down to be 25 and 3. And that 25 I can break down to be 5 and 5. So I get negative 24 times the square root of 3 times 5 times 5. So I have a pair of 5s that I can go ahead and take out. So I'm going to have negative 24 times 5, and then left underneath the radical is the square root of 3. Negative 24 times 5 is negative 120, and then left underneath the radical is 3. So I have negative 120 times the square root of 3. Now, taking a look at number 11, what I suggest you do with problems like number 11 is to simplify first. So I want to break down that 12 first and foremost. So I'm going to split that down into being 4 and 3, and then the 4 I'm going to break down to 2 and 2. So then I know that I can take out a pair of 2's here in a second. So I'm going to have 3 times the square root of 2 times 2 times 3. Well, the square root of 6 isn't going to break down anymore, so I'm going to leave that. And 2 times the square root of 3 is not going to break down anymore, so I'm also going to leave that. Well, I can take out a pair of 2's here, so I get 3 times 2, and then left underneath the radical is 3 times the square root of 6 times 2 times the square root of 3. So then I'm going to multiply these together, so I get 6 square root of 3 times the square root of 6 times 2 square root of 3. So then I'm going to multiply 6 times 1 times 2 for those numbers on the outside. And that's going to give me, when I do that, 6 times 12 times 2 is going to give me 12. Then I'm going to multiply underneath that radical, and I'm going to get 3 times 6 times 3. Now that's going to give me the square root of 54. So I'm going to have to break down that 54 some more. So 54 breaks down to 6 and 9. That 6 I can break down to 2 and 3. That 9 I can break down to 3 and 3. So then I end up getting 12 times the square root of 2 times 3 times 3 times 3. So I can go ahead and I can factor out one pair of 2's. So then I get 12 times 3 when I take that pair out, and then left underneath the radical is 6. Well, 12 times 3 is 36, and then we have square root of 6. So then I get 36 square root of 6 as my final answer for number 11. Now, taking a look at number 12, the first thing I want to do is simplify that 18 down to start off with. So I'm going to break down that 18 into being 9 and 2, and then I'm breaking that 9 down into being 3 and 3. So then I'm going to have negative 3 times the square root of 2 times 3 times 3. And then that's going to be multiplied by the square root of 2. So I can take out a pair of 3's. And then I have negative 3 times 3, and left underneath the radical is the square root of 2, and then that's going to be multiplied by the square root of 2. So then I get negative 9 square root of 2 times the square root of 2. So that's going to end up being negative 9 times the square root of 4. Well, how do we break down the square root of 4? That's just going to be 2 and 2. So then I'm going to get negative 9 times the square root of 2 times 2. Well, I can take both of those 2's and I can put them in one pair. So because they're in one pair, that means that I can take it out and get rid of the radical altogether. So that's going to end up being negative 9 times 2, which is going to give me a negative 18. So my answer to number 12 is a negative 18. So that concludes your note video for today. Go ahead and show me your completed note video once you're done. Thanks for listening.